In other words, you walk them into a like organized way of doing things. That's immediately not okay. They need to go and like set fire to things, break a few things around, throw it around, and then create the chaos in order for them to then be able to function. So once you learn this is how this person needs to be, that's how you can develop a method of working with them. But you got to identify: is this a chaos guy or is this a law and order guy? You know,
I think it depends on the day of the week for me. Sometimes chaos.
day of the week, maybe the coffee intake, maybe
That's a
culture.
day.
Who knows? It could be lots of things. Anyway, welcome everybody to Brainfood Live on air. Bringing it to you every week as usual. We're actually doing this on Wednesday, not Friday, and unscheduled rather disastrously. I'm doing this from Heathrow Airport, whereas in fact I should be in Bogota already. But flight disaster, etc., means a 24-hour postponement. Hence, I've had to come and do it here in the private lounge, which is okay, but it's, people are in here. So at any moment, this may go disastrously wrong. If so, I can blame Avianca, the Colombian airline. Anyway, quick sound check, everybody. Make sure everyone can hear me okay. If you can see me in Crowdcast, let me know in the chat whether everything is okay. Audio visual looks fine, even though I'm a little bit blurry. I think I should be okay. I do believe I'm launching this in LinkedIn as well. So if you can see me on LinkedIn, do let me know whether you can see me okay. Give me a comment, thumbs up, thumbs down, stuff like that. Okay, great. Looks like people can see and hear me. Thank you very much, everyone. That's all good and live. Cool. And I've been talking away, but we haven't introduced our co-host today, the one and only Jonathan Romley. So, Jonathan, wonderful to see you. I wonder whether it actually might be a good time for you to quickly introduce yourself. Who are you? What it is you do? Maybe say a few things about Lundy as well.
Sure. So, hey everyone, I'm Jonathan. I'm the co-founder of a company called Lundy. And if you're hiring in a part of the world where you don't live and you don't know a lot about, well, we're going to be your best friends. We're going to be your best friends because we are both in your part of the world and in the part of the world where you're trying to hire. So that can be pretty helpful. And if you don't know where you want to hire and you're really stuck, we can even help you figure that out. So that's a little bit about what we do.
More than this, I mean, we actually get this question in the online community a lot, where people pop in and say, hey, listen, I need a recruitment supplier in Tanzania. I have no clue how to recruit in Tanzania. Have you got anybody? Obviously, no one has any clue. So that's a dead end straight away. But I always say to them, hey, listen, check out Lundy. This is what they've set up to do. So, folks, if you didn't know, and you need to basically recruit in a territory that you have no experience of doing, and you've got actually no on-the-ground resource to recruit those local staff, then you want to be partnering with local suppliers, recruitment suppliers that can help you. And what Lundy is basically an agency marketplace internationally for that purpose. So why don't you share the link to the website to the chat there, Jonathan? I'm sure people will want to check it out. Just bookmark this, folks. You don't need to dive in and go crazy, but there is going to be a point in time when suddenly you get a requirement. Oh, we need to hire someone in the Philippines or something. Well, you're not going to know how to do that. But there are recruiters in the Philippines that run recruitment businesses on Lundy, and Lundy will connect you to them. Simple as that. So I think a super useful product, and a lot of people. Basically, it solves a problem that we don't often have, but when we do have it, we're wandering around how to solve it. So this is definitely something you need to check out. Okay, Jonathan, let's do this real quick. We always review the newsletter. I know you haven't read it.
Never in my life.
You haven't read it, have you? Obviously not. So we're not able to talk about the newsletter.
Of course, we're able to talk about the newsletter.
Okay, give me a few things that you read last week on the newsletter that you thought were quite interesting.
Well, the first one that I thought was interesting was a Google sheet of AI tools for recruiters. I didn't know about all of these tools. I also saw that a couple that we use We're not there, and I feel like they're so special that I shouldn't even share them, but I will. There's a tool called clay.com that we're using in Lundy, and that's something that we use to identify companies that are maybe posting jobs in places where they don't have employees, in places where they don't have recruiters and reaching out. But it's pretty similar to kind of a mix of Airtable and Zapier, allowing you to kind of do step by step everything in one place. So I think there are a lot of, anywhere where there's like a business development outreach case, there's most definitely a recruitment outreach case. And yeah, I was surprised not to see that there. But some tools I didn't know existed. That was cool. There's so many products that just are adding AI on top of, whatever. It's like the milk in your cereal now. Now with extra sugar.
You know what? That's a great way to put it. It's exactly what it is. It is literally becoming a mandatory thing. And the wonderful thing is we're seeing a massive explosion of technologies that really can be very simply put together. So anyway, I've just shared that spreadsheet into the chat. Just go and check it out. I've actually asked Ala, who created it, to open it up. So basically, you can actually add stuff to this. So if you have a tool you think is quite interesting, it doesn't belong there, go add to it. And then let's create a decent resource for all of us to share. Obviously behave with the spreadsheet, because it is an open spreadsheet. Don't go and delete it or anything stupid like that. Just be respectful of the work people put in, but add stuff in. I know, is it clay.ai or something? Clay.com. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, cool. Okay, Jonathan, give us another thing that you read that was interesting.
How to share. There was a post on LinkedIn by, I think you mentioned that they were a former colleague. Is it James Mays or Mize?
James, yes, that's right.
How to share negative feedback. And I thought it was really interesting that the investor, in this case it was an investor that was sharing negative feedback, asked if James was ready to receive negative feedback. I don't think I've asked somebody if they're ready to receive negative feedback before. I think often we're reactive, maybe when we give negative feedback. Not every time, but sometimes. Like, oh, this is really bothering me, and I should share this feedback, irrespective of the other party, like what is going on with them right now. Yeah. So I thought that was really. That really showed empathy from the person that was about to drop a bomb. Yeah.
And smart, man, because I am reluctant to share feedback because I've not used this technique, and I've bust out with it basically, and inevitably that people feel that as an attack. If I just said, Jonathan, that really did this and this, I personally think I'm just being straight with Jonathan, being direct. But because I've not prepared you mentally to receive this, you just get something thrown at you, and immediately you might
defensive, and I don't listen. I don't hear you.
Yeah, you might just like come straight back at me, and before you know it, you're in this really negative feedback loop. But anyway, James had this experience. If people who don't know, James is an ex-colleague of mine. If you're watching this, James, hello. But he's launching a new product. Lots of people give him great feedback on his new product, but he had one experience with an investor that didn't give him great feedback. But the manner in which that feedback was delivered to James caused him to actually ruminate on it and document it and publish it, to say, you know what, that's a really good way of telling people that they don't fancy your thing. And one of the primary ways in which you do this is that you ask the question, are you ready to hear negative feedback? So are you ready to hear some tough news? Are you ready to hear something that you may not prefer to want to hear? And then your answer is going to be yes. But by saying yes, you've kind of agreed that you're mentally ready to receive that information. And I just think, man, that's just great management, great communication. We should elevate this at every negotiation scenario, highest level of geopolitics, lowest level of family, friends level. No matter where it is, this will work. Are you ready to receive feedback that you don't? That may be actually quite painful, right? And then that's going to prepare the person so they don't feel as if it's an attack. Wonderful feedback. I'd recommend you read the post, very short, couple of bullet points. I'm going to start adopting this behavior that James has experienced. I think it's a wonderful way to communicate feedback, which I've so far been reluctant to give because I didn't want to offend people. And I almost got to the point where I was fearful of giving feedback because I consistently had, people feeling as if they were attacked. Actually, no, I was just me being very bad at giving bad feedback. So I need to get better at it. All right, give us one more, Jonathan, before we get into this.
No, if somebody says, no, I'm not ready to receive.
Don't deliver it. Just say, that's okay. Let's talk about something else and you let me know when you are ready. But I think most people will say they are because it's almost like a challenge as well. It's like, sure, I'm tough enough to take this. And then, okay, once you've set that back, then you've kind of given yourself like a mental buffer to receive that information. And so long as it's not like an egregious attack on you, like a genuine attack on you, I think you'd actually deal with it quite well. But I remember an old boss sort of said this. This is an old lesson, but an old boss of mine said the same thing. He'd just always say this: "Do you want fluffy talk, or do you want it straight between the eyes?" And it's similar, right? And everyone says straight between the eyes, and then he'll bust out with it. But because you've made the choice, it feels like there's agency. You've controlled that experience to a large degree, and you can take it. Great. This is great parenting skills. If you're parenting a child, this is how you do it. Anyway, give us one more, mate.
My 2.5-year-old, if she was ready for feedback, she would ask me for a cookie. So
that's it.
You gotta be a little bit older for that, I guess.
Yeah, get practicing a 2-year-old though. I'm sure should do okay. Okay.
Just say yes to everything. The third thing, the Riviera Partners executive compensation report made me evaluate my own meaning of life, I guess. But surprisingly flat, or perhaps not surprisingly, if we look at the way things are going in the corporate world most of this year. Maybe not a surprise that most people did not get a salary increase that are wearing the boss pants.
Yeah, it's a really interesting report. I forget who sent it to me, but it's from, I believe, some exec search firm. That. And by the way, I see some exec search people in the chat here. This type of content is just fantastic content to push out. So, David, I think MPA Worldwide here. If you could ever pull together this type of stuff, it would be definitely Brainfood worthy. But I think these guys were exec search for VC-backed tech companies, and they just published something to say, look, here's how salaries are going, compensation, equity, etc. Clearly, if you're working for any VC-backed business, this is really interesting information, and you should download that report. Okay, cool. Let's get on with this conversation, man. Let's talk about hiring in LATAM. I'm guessing you know nothing about this, Jonathan. Is that correct?
That would be false. That would be false.
Tell me what you know about hiring in Latin America.
We are helping a lot of companies to hire. I mean, Latin America is a continent, right? So, but in places like in Colombia and in Argentina, and at Lundy, we actually have members of our team. Maybe I don't know. Maybe even one of them is here. If you're here, give me a wave. In Argentina, so we even have a team that's part of Lundy that covers Latin America, that's based in Argentina. So very different markets, of course. Just like Europe is not one country, every country in Latin America is a different country. But yeah, I think that our experience has been very positive. On the engineering side, we've seen that looks like a lot of American companies have driven up the cost of engineering type resources in Latin America, and it's been a challenge for us when we hear from companies like I'm in Spain, and when we meet with companies in Spain that have this great idea to hire in Latin America, whatever that means, because they think they're going to reduce costs, they're often pretty disappointed. Particularly when they're really niche roles, that the cost is kind of on par, and that employer tax costs, if you're employing people as employees and using an EOR, right, in Brazil, for example, can be really high. So we, as in all places, have a lot of scattered experiences all over the region, but I know that there are some guests today that are really in the trenches, doing this every day, and I'm looking forward to hearing from them.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a few things we should learn. I mean, when we're doing the How to Hire series, the ideal would be to narrow it down to even country, even city level, because there is such regional variance. I mean, you look at the United States, classic example. I can't say how to hire United States because you know what, hiring in California very different from hiring in Nebraska somewhere, right? So it's everything has difference and everything has nuance. But we're going to have to give Latin America kind of an overgeneralization in this case, simply because of time constraints and what have you. So bear that in mind. So we're not going to make any, overly committed, definitive points, and we're probably going to end up veering towards, things that might be stereotypical. Having said that, we also need to try and make some sort of generalizations so that if an employer or a recruiter doesn't have experience of hiring for anybody in Latin America, how do you go about and do that? And what are the things that you can anticipate? So we're going to bring some guests on today, right now, in fact, and we'll talk about it. And Erin, I just see you in the chat here. So, hey, listen, if you're happy to come on, we'll definitely bring you on, Erin. You've always got some wonderful chat to contribute. So I'd be interested to know how a non-native speaker, let's say, interacts. For instance, language is one of the key issues for any type of international hiring. Can an English only person succeed in doing this? And if not, what do you do? But let's bring on some of our guests here. We'll see where we'll get. I can see Iska here. Let's bring Iska Gonzalez on. I'm going to bring on Juliana Park as well. Stephen, I'm going to bring you on in a bit, in a moment, because I want to try and just split this around a little bit. And Carlos, I think Carlos is here as well. Let's bring on Juliana. Oh, there she is. How are you doing?
Hello. Very well. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
No, wonderful to see you, and thank you so much for being like such a hero, supporting everything on Brainfood. I know I see
Always.
this, and
Everywhere.
you're amazing on that. So why don't you quickly introduce yourself, Iska? Who are you? What is you do?
Sure. I'm an international talent acquisition consultant. I started years ago, more than 15 years ago, as a trainee in recruiting in Mexico City. So I've been recruiting for more than 15 years, most of the times for Latin America, reporting to corporate offices in the United States or in Europe. So most of my experience recruiting is in-house recruiting, but as I also have experience as a freelance, as an RPO, managing agencies, so everything recruiting from Mexico to Brazil.
Fantastic and wonderful to see you there. And there's Carlos. Carlos, how are you doing? Wonderful to see you. We are already on WhatsApp, and I apologize to Carlos to say I am not already in Colombia, but I will be there shortly, my friend. So Carlos, can you hear me okay? He can't. That's fine. Let's go to Juliana first. Juliana, wonderful to see you. Can you quickly introduce yourself, Juliana? Who are you? What it is you do?
Sure. My name is Juliana. I'm South Korean and I grew up in Brazil. And I started in the industry serving Korean global companies based in Brazil, and also companies that were expanding operations in Latin America, especially in Brazil. So in the last year, I hired professionals, most of them from the tech industry, not only in Brazil, but in other countries such as Chile, Argentina, and US. And I also hired country managers and for sales positions for those companies who were expanding operations for Brazil. So yeah, I also have Brazilian startups and small and medium enterprises as clients too.
Fantastic, wonderful to see you here, Juliana. And Carlos, I don't think you heard us earlier, but sorry, I'm not already there, but I will be in Bogota in about 12 hours. Okay, but wonderful to see you, Carlos. Quickly introduce yourself. Who are you? What it is you do? Oh, Carlos, I think you're muted, man.
I can hear.
The video is solid, but the audio is no bueno.
It's probably the settings of your computer. You have to give access to crowd to your microphone.
maybe refresh the browser, Carlos, but come back to us once you refresh, and we'll hear your dulcet tones. Okay, let's go to you first, Iska. When you're talking about hiring in Latin America, do you ever get like US companies saying, "Oh, we're hiring suddenly in Chile or hiring in whatever"? Like, what do they need to know in order to actually succeed as an employer of choice for new territories in Latin America that that is obvious to you now, but may not be obvious to them?
Yeah, I think I will start honestly with the communication. I know it seems the most basic thing, but the I would say the key here is that in the United States or even in Europe, you already have like a way to work. The job description is written in a certain way. You have certain benefits, as Jonathan said, is completely different in Latin America. So something that I've seen a lot in companies is that they ask to their local HR recruiting team to start a search in a different country. And when they do, they don't know really what are the benefits going to look like. They didn't really understand the structure and the scope of the role based in the region. Something that is happening a lot now in companies, not only manufacturing, but also like startups or even like consuming goods companies, is that they want to base in Latin America a position that reports to either Europe or United States, and they have like a regional scope. When you have a scope like that, obviously the salary has to be higher, even for the region. And there's a lot of information sometimes inside of the companies that local compensation and benefits says that you need to have internal equity. And then all these things that are not happening in the back end are affecting recruiting, because the recruiting teams or the agencies you reach out locally are going to start looking for candidates like this, and they are going to find your candidates, and the moment you already have them there, then you don't know how much are you going to pay. You're not prepared with the onboarding, and this could start from the beginning with good communication. So I think it depends on what you're looking for. If you're hiring for an international company that has presence in Latin America, but it's a new position, for example, you definitely need to be in communication with human resources, recruitment, your legal department. You have to set clear expectations with the hiring manager as well. And you have to start defining important things like interview dates and availability, because candidates in Latin America, mainly the ones that speak English, are going to be in more than one process, and they would like to move fast. Because now it's like, I was reading a report from Gallup that says that 59% of employees in Latin America are quiet quitting, and 11% are loud quitting. So there's a lot of people in Latin America interested to move. That's why the processes are moving faster. So there's so much that you have to take into consideration in terms of local practices, language, and who are you going to work with. That's why, honestly, my best recommendation is communicate clearly and set clear expectations.
Yeah, really good. Iska, so you're saying basically don't assume that you can just turn the key and it happens. There's all kinds of local nuance involved, and actually, on the language side, a fluent English language speaker in Latin America that also speaks the native tongue is of a premium value. Because obviously they can interact with local economy, but also be connected to any kind of global sort of institution.
It is, because it depends on the industry. And I was talking about this with Juliana. There's a huge difference, by the way, if you're going to recruit from Mexico to Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, etc. You have to separate in a very positive way Brazil, because then it's even harder to find someone that speaks Portuguese and a very fluent English. Even for technology companies, you can have amazing talent preparing every technology that you want, but they might not be very fluent in English. So that's one of the main things that happen in the other side, which is all Spanish-speaking countries. And then something that is happening as well is they want to find someone that speaks Portuguese in Mexico, in Chile, and it's not very common. You're not going to find people in Central America that speaks Portuguese. It's very similar, and we might be able to speak Portuñol, but we're not going to speak Spanish, English, and Portuguese. It's very complex. That's one of the main differences from Europe, for example. There you might find people with more languages. Here is honestly not that easy. And it goes premium, as you said.
Yeah, and that's a really important point because what is there? Something like 450 million people in Latin America, but Brazil is a big chunk of that. It's the biggest country by population by far. Therefore, when you think, if you, I can imagine some US company, with a vision, say, hey, we've got 500 million people we can recruit from. That's all well and good, but let's break this down, and you can see actually Brazil might have a big chunk of this, and perhaps English language proficiency, if that's a requirement, is not as high as it might be, let's say, in Colombia or Mexico or Argentina, perhaps, or
Yeah,
Chile.
yeah, that's correct. And it's also like it's not just a matter of location, but the industry has a lot to do with this as well.
Let's get back to the industry in a bit, but as we've talked about Brazil, let's bring in Juliana on this.
Of course.
Juliana, you live in Brazil, obviously, and you speak Brazilian, sorry, Portuguese Brazilian, should I say? What is your feeling with regards to working with companies that are looking particularly to hire Brazilian staff? What do you see as an interesting sort of thing from a recruitment perspective, where you can say, okay, here's something that actually companies that are hiring in Brazil need to know that perhaps they don't know if they have never done it before?
Yes, Brazil, although Brazil is the most, biggest country in Latin America, Argentina has more English speakers. Most of tech company, I think, know this when come to Latin America looking for tech professionals. So here in Brazil, we have this problem of finding good knowledge of English. But even if you find tech people that have these English skills, they are already working for a foreign company, They are already having a remuneration in US dollars. So you need to offer more than his current remuneration. And also for those that are just hiring for the first time in Brazil, I really should give an advice for talking to local people to get to know, because Brazilian labor law is too complex. So you need to understand how does it work here. So because you can just be in a trouble in the future. And also about the financial taxes. That is a little bit complicated. And that's it.
No, really interesting. Basically, English language speakers may already be employed with a premium job. So the mentality that you're going to come in and suddenly be able to elevate everyone's standard of living, it may have been the case 20 years or so ago, 15 years or so ago, not the case today, because these people are well educated. They're obviously all connected, and they can identify these opportunities very clearly. It's not like it's a hidden story that, guess what, US companies particularly interested in hiring in Latin America due to the time zone, due to the quality of the people, and now with the shift to remote makes it a lot easier to do so. And I think even in Portugal, which in Europe has been like a very high growth area for tech. That's also been particularly interested in hiring Brazilian engineers as well. And so to a large degree, if you like, the secret is out. There's quality people in these countries, and you need to come up with competitive options. You can't just assume because you have this sort of brand, it's going to be this type of pricing. A very interesting point by Irina in the chat. I totally agree. A lot of the culture and country info is simply not in a search engine, and you need to interact with local people in order to do this. And by the way, I think AI will also struggle with this, because AI is obviously all on documented information, which is Googleable. But the real thing that happens is often not documented. And it's basically the difference between learning how to speak a language via a classroom and then learning actually how people do use it in the street. And they're two different things, right? They're not, I think everyone would understand that picture. Okay, cool. Iska, you mentioned something about sectors. every sector is different. Tell us a little bit more about this. What do you mean by, sectoral differences from an industry perspective? Can you sort of share a little bit of your insight there?
Yeah, sure. I think it has to do with, for example, Mexico, which is a big part of Latin America that concentrates a lot of talent. And there are so many companies that have headquarters or offices hiding from Mexico, also for different parts of Latin America, has a big industry like manufacturing, transformation, automotive, aerospace. Manufacturing is completely different how it works than, for example, technology, startups, online travel agencies. These type of companies that are more tech-based might be a little bit more open and flexible. Manufacturing still being very traditional and conservative. That impacts, of course, the recruiting processes because, of course, I should say there's so many good things that you can find in Latin America, and you're going to find the amazing companies and HR areas that are organized, structural, that have like best practices that are totally in compliance, but you are going to find practices in all these countries that we mentioned where people, candidates are asked, for example, what's their age? Who do they live with? These type of things that compared to United States, Europe, or other places are almost unbelievable. This happens a lot in manufacturing, for example. The salary expectation that a quality engineer that speaks English and that perhaps already work in a different country is higher compared to someone that is not speaking English but has all the willing to be part of these type of companies. And it's not going to be the same if you work with a local agency recruiting than, as I mentioned, if you have your in-house recruiting team. So all these type of differences have a lot to do with the speed, cost, and quality that you're going to have in your recruiting processes. Today, the candidates have a lot of expectations when they hear that an international company is hiring. And the first one, I think someone mentioned it in the chat, is like Mexico, Colombia, and other countries are so focused on base salary after taxes. Because, and Juliana mentioned this, there's a huge chunk of your salary that goes into taxes that candidates think only base salary after taxes. I don't care if you give me meal vouchers, medical insurance, because there's a huge also culture in terms of extra benefits that, as I said, startups or these technology companies might have for sure from other countries. They bring that into the game in Latin America, and for the people, honestly, it's not that important because they are so focused on the salary. So it has to do a lot with that.
Really, really interesting point. And I think a lot of people do think this way. It's like what is the net number? That is important. And I can imagine a sort of, let's say, a foreign company not even thinking about this because they've just generated their number in terms of, oh, here's the salary we're paying. But guess what? That number is going to change based on the jurisdiction of the person that you're recruiting to, because they're under different tax regimes. So you need to understand.
Oh boy, in Brazil.
Is Brazilian taxation higher?
Oh yeah. Oh, real big. Very, very high. I mean,
what is the difference between, let's say, the taxation scheme in Brazil versus, let's say, Mexico or Colombia?
It's a lot closer to France, but Juliana, you're in Brazil, so tell us more.
Well, there are a lot of, it's not easy to understand because sometimes it's unbelievable, even though when you're living in Brazil, but we have you have some tax first and the other tax above this tax, it's a lot of tax. And if you're going to pay from foreign country, sometimes it's better you hire a recruiting an HR firm here to figure to do this, the payment role for you, because they know the Brazilian law. And well, the taxes in Brazil, it's very high because you have financial taxes and kind of a lot of taxes.
Sorry, may I say something? Like in the other countries, it's like you have the structure is called like carga patronal, pretty similar. So it's what the employer has to pay per person, and it has to do with like social security, because here in most of the countries, they do have access to Social Security paid by the company. So if you add to that the vacation days and any other type of benefit the company has, that's what sums up. Because what happens with the international companies is they think like, okay, I'm going to assign $3,000 for this person as a salary, but then you have to add the taxes that the company has to pay per that plus the benefits and any type of bonus, everything it's going to taxes. So that's why it's an increased amount. 30% we
100%
consider at
more
least.
like this. And if you're a foreign company hiring in Brazil and you're using an employer of record, it's one of the few countries that you may encounter where the VAT is not removed on a cross-border transaction. So like in Europe, you know, if I buy something from the UK and you ship it to me in Spain, like I don't pay. If you have this service of, I don't know, an IT service in another country, you usually don't pay the VAT on that service in a cross-border transaction. But there's VAT on the like employer of record service, on the salary, even some percent. So there is just a lot of stuff. Basically, like whatever the person gets on their hands, in our experience, and I mean, we're not in the market, but just from afar, the cost to the employer is usually double.
Yes, that's it. Exactly, June.
Yes. So this is very, very interesting. And again, this is education for people who, you know, have a broad treatment of Latin America as one unit. It's like you need to obviously understand the legal jurisdictions. And if you don't understand, then this is where you do need to have a company to help you resolve this. I wonder whether there's a technology business that does this actually, that, you know, something like a comply advantage where essentially, you know, it could keep you updated in terms of how laws change per country, so that if you're going to do something in any place, it can provide information. Maybe that's a service that Lundy can one day
we have the
offer.
data. When we compare countries for a company that we're working with, we give the data not only on salaries, but also on employment regulations, so that you can compare, you know, for example, that in a country like Argentina, people, depending on the role, want to be paid in dollars, which makes them a contractor, versus, you know, if you're hiring in Brazil, you really need to want to hire in Brazil, like you're launching an office there, or you have something physically that you need to do in Brazil, is a really great reason to hire in Brazil. Otherwise, you know, employer tax costs are much lower in Chile. So we help you to compare those things, but only in the context of like an engagement that we already have. Still not publicly available on our website. I did share a link though to some insights about labor market regulations in Brazil. That is available on the Lundy site for every country we're in, so more than 70 countries. You can go and check what are the regulations.
Okay, so yeah, like basically it would be great for there to be one website that you could do the comparison and what have you. But yeah, who knows whether that service is available or not, or someone's going to build it. But really interesting. Let's talk about things like dollar payments. This is a mystery to a lot of people outside of different jurisdictions, that you may actually be paid in a currency that is, you know, not the national currency. How common is that in Latin America? Is that something desirable? And if so, how does it even work? I mean, I think someone said, okay, if you're paid in dollars, it means that the person needs to set up a company, and they'll be receiving.
You're in Argentina, probably, if you're getting paid.
Yeah, I mean, there obviously is huge inflation in Argentina, right? So tell us a little bit more about this. Like, is it common for people in certain Latin American countries to be paid in US dollars aside from their national currency? Yes, no?
Honestly, I don't see it. I think it's more local currency. Only, for example, yeah, Argentina is one of the cases because of their current situation with inflation. There's a lot of people that it's joining technology companies or remote roles, like developers, these type of even digital assistants or virtual assistants. They can charge in dollars, and they are using more like platforms to pay. But if you are like a company that is opening businesses there, not necessarily offices, then you're going to pay in Argentinian pesos. And it's a huge trouble, I will say, because you have to be so aware of the changes due to inflation. Is part of what candidates or employees are expecting every certain amount of time. So that's something that you have to be very aware of all the time. In the other countries, no, you have you can have a legal entity, you can have a company, an outsourced company that helps you with the payments, but it's going to be in local currency, because then the employee will have to do their taxes, and then it's like not very common. It might be for like technical roles, very, very technology oriented roles, but most of the companies will have a local currency.
Very, very interesting. And the inflation adjustment, I think, is actually super interesting. So what you're saying there is, because basically, specifically to Argentina, let's say a candidate is not only looking for a salary, but they're looking for the employer's ability to adjust salary according to inflation, based on the rapid escalation of the price of the or the value of the Argentinian peso.
It is.
So.
Sorry, I was going to say it's actually something that human resources in Argentina, when they work with other countries for the same company, they're like, if you're going to look for someone here, you need to know that it's going to change your budget every certain amount of months. So, and the candidates are giving you the candidates will say, today, this is my salary in Argentinian pesos. In 6 months, I'm going to have an increase. So today, I'm considering that increased salary for you to hire me. And that's why it takes so long to hire in Argentina.
And
It's
there are
like
like
back and
4
forth.
different exchange rates. There's the official
Yep.
bank rate that nobody can get for changing money, and then there's like the Western Union rate. I don't know. I did see that Solange, a member of our team from
And the street rate.
should have some more insight on all those different exchange rates. But I mean, it's a wild situation down there.
Do you know what? That's really interesting, because we actually started to see people in North America start arguing for inflation adjustment. We started Carlos, thanks. I think we can hear you, but I've muted you because there was some background. But anyway, I'll bring you back. So basically, I remembered during there was software engineers in Silicon Valley who were previously compensated with equity grants based on stock prices for their companies, and they were trying to renegotiate, having accepted what they thought was this number, but with stock prices crashing, they said, you know what, actually this is far less than what I anticipated, and they started to negotiate for this. So we might start seeing more not variable but elastic type of compensation based on what the real value is, because it's a moving target all the time. So very interesting it was also. Okay, we have to bring Carlos in, who's been wrestling with the technology, but he is back with us. Carlos, I think it's a super loud mic, by the way. But
do you hear me well or not?
Oh yeah, it works.
We can hear you well. Too much. You're too loud, bro. Can you turn it down?
Okay. I will do it.
Overdrive.
Okay, Carlos, wonderful to see you. Can maybe you do some intros? Can you intro yourself real quick? Who are you? What it is you do?
Okay, we are 23 years doing recruiting, and mainly the first 10 years was only, let's say, sending Latin Americans for Middle East oil and gas energy companies. So we recruit from the entire region, Mexico, Colombia, Argentina, for major energy companies in that region. That's our brief summary of what we do. So yeah, thank you for the invitation.
No, and so Carlos, having heard some of the stuff that Juliana and Isco shared, and they're possibly working with slightly different sectors also. So you're working more on the energy sector and people of this type. What would you say is particularly like unique about hiring people in oil and gas and people in that sector compared to, let's say, tech and IT?
Well, basically, the engineers are looking for new technologies or continue their careers in companies in Middle East. Middle East has the technologies. Let's say Aramco, one of the major energy companies, so are facing different and interesting challenge that the Latin Americans are willing to get. So they are interested in hiring these kind of companies. Other is unconventionals. Unconventionals in Argentina, Argentina is the second largest in unconventionals worldwide, with more than 500 wells. So Saudi Arabia, when they start recruiting, they were focused on Argentinians, pretty focused because of the experience, and they don't have worldwide other countries with that experience. And as Juliana and my colleagues share, I mean, the value for taxes and for make income in a hard currency, it's really attractive for them, I'd say.
Yeah, very, very interesting. And by the
Yeah.
way, Aaron in the chat has just shared a really interesting custom search engine for LinkedIn, which essentially you can search by country codes, which is a classic way to try and identify particular people living in certain countries based on, you know, what sort of country code they're using. So potentially useful for you to do that as well. Folks, we always do this in the middle of every show, so now we're going to do it also. We want to make sure that Brainfood Live is a conversation starter, not a conversation ending type of show. But we do have to come off air in about 20 minutes or so the conversation will cease as far as we're concerned here. But let's make sure we continue the chat on your own case. And you can do that best by obviously connecting with everyone who is involved in the conversation today. So why don't we take a moment, grab your LinkedIn URL and share it in the chat stream if you're watching this in Crowdcast, and then make sure you connect with everyone else who's done the same. And if you're watching this on LinkedIn, wherever you are, share your LinkedIn into the comment thread and then connect with everyone who's done the same. Worst case scenario, everyone walks away with 20, 30, 40 connections that care about hiring in LATAM, and who knows, probably know something about it, in which case you're going to be in good shape to continue to build your knowledge on this. Okay, before we bring Stephen on, well, let's go a quick round to the people who are currently on panel. If you were to speak to an English guy or a American person or, you know, a German individual that was recruiting into Latin America, what's one piece of advice you'd give that person for them to succeed? Aside from the stuff we've talked about today, is there like one thing you can say, you know what, got to make sure this is correct, whether it's a legal thing, a cultural thing, or whatever it might be, technology thing? What do you reckon that would be? Let's go with you, Iska, firstly. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it has to do with culture, definitely. Don't expect that the candidates already know how to talk to you, because in Latin America, and I think this goes from Mexico to Brazil, people is very warm. Sometimes people is kind of afraid to interact. Even when they speak English, they are afraid or nervous to talk with someone from a different country. And the technology most of the times can fail. Sometimes internet is not the best. So try to recognize if you have any type of bias in terms of technology, culture, how people say hello, how they introduce themselves. Be aware that communication is more important then, and if people can express what you need to hear and you can identify that they can do the job is more important than if they say the right word or if there's a mistake, a typo in the resume, because that happens sometimes. You see those differences and then it starts to be biased your decision. So try to be as open as you can and focus on the skills and the experience of the candidates from the resume to the interview.
Yeah, that's really interesting and really good as well. I think we need to take into account sort of the this sense, like a lot of us have ended up using English as the default language, but it's not the default language in Latin America. And therefore you cannot expect people to be as fluent or as confident or as fluent as you might expect. Interesting comment in the chat about the use of AI and translation tech and what have you. Is that going to like ameliorate this or change it in some way? Probably, I think in some way, but we don't know where that's going to go. So yeah, that's a really good tip, Iska. How about you, Juliana? Any thoughts that you'd like to share for a newbie, let's say, German recruiter needs to, you know, hire someone in Chile? What advice would you give that person?
Well, I think Iska just said about being very clear about what the employer can offer, like being very transparent, I think is important. And well, although a lot of, kind of challenge, people that live in emerging countries used to be more resilient. So that's a good point for Brazilians, and I always hear good feedbacks from the employers about the Brazilians professionals. And yes, they work very hard when they are qualified enough to be hired, and yes, I have already said about the Brazilian law, so it's very important to get to know better because it's very complex here in Brazil, and try to do things according to the Brazilian law too. That's
Yeah,
it.
we probably don't have time to go exactly into the cultural nuances as well, but there's also various ways to behave in terms of your type of formality, informality, the sort of the way in which you can become familiar with someone is different in every culture. So all of those things will probably something we'll have to look at maybe next year, where we try and do a per country type of analysis. That would be an interesting one. Carlos, let's leave it to you. Steve, I'm going to bring you in a sec, by the way. Carlos, your thoughts, your advice, if you're hiring a recruiter for your team that was actually, someone based in France, but they were recruiting in Colombia, like what do they need to know in order to be an effective recruiter for you?
Well, I think so. Other things is the stability of the countries. Sometimes, for example, the industry I recruit in Latin America is very common that change the president every 4 years or whatever. So depending if you know the market, and for example, in Colombia right now we have a president that is making a lot of noise in the industry. So people willing to leave just the company, and it's a very Latin American thing. And one great thing that I will recommend him is just talk about security. Our streets let's say Latin America has like kind of pickpocket, something that is very difficult to transmit, but the people like. And if you live in Spain or if you live in Europe or if you are hiring for someone, the security is an issue that if you express in your interview, for example, Middle East is very safe. It's really safe. The people is like really appreciate that kind of thing. So you have the soft skills, the hard skills, the technical people are prepared. If you do a good pre-screening, you find the English speaking people, really. So you need to focus more in that part of the attractiveness and say, hey, guy, this country is, in Europe, nothing happened. In Europe, everything is almost the same, but here, no. Here, the companies change due to political situation. So it's very interesting for all of you to be, if you are focusing in Latin America, to understand what's going on in the political.
Very important point, and actually, you make the issue about political stability, but in Europe and elsewhere, it seems that political instability is starting to come in greater sort of sense. So perhaps we will have to learn a little bit more from Latin American folks in terms of, okay, how do you handle it when the political environment can rapidly change? What impact does that have with employer branding, recruitment, talent attraction, and so on? So very interesting. Folks, we're going to have to leave it there. I'm going to bring Steve on now because he's coming in from, I believe, North America, and he does recruit from LATAM. So he's going to give us a different perspective. So let's have a look for one of those guys. We're going to say goodbye here to Iska, Juliana, and Carlos. So thank you for joining us. We'll definitely try and do this again. Wonderful to see you. And thanks for your insight and input. It's been really, really interesting. Carlos, I'll see you soon, of course. I'll be flying.
Where are you here?
Yeah.
Next time you.
Oh, we've lost him.
Next time.
But next time. Okay, well, let's get Steve on because he's been very patient. And we'll just I wanted to just separate just a little bit because getting 4 people on screen difficult because you can't get everyone talking and contribute in this way. So let's have a look from Steve's perspective. I understand Steve is a person that recruits internationally. Actually, Steve will tell us himself. There he is, Steve.
Hey, Steve.
Wonderful
Hey.
to see you, and
Good to see you.
great hair, by the way. I need to figure out what product you're using for that. Steve, can you quickly introduce yourself? Who are you? What it is you do?
Absolutely. So Steve Poeska, I've been in the global talent space for most of my career. Currently, I'm leading the global talent mission for Lionbridge Games, which is a video game company that predominantly does functional testing and localization, translation, globalization for large-scale video game publishers and developers.
Fantastic. And I've just shared Steve's LinkedIn into the chat stream there, so make sure you check him out and connect also. Steve, having heard all of the contributions, which is only just a snippet, of course, we've only had 30 minutes of chat, but did any of that resonate with you when you're looking at the sort of recruitment work that you've been doing with Lionbridge?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. So Lionbridge Games has been recruiting in Mexico for, I would say, maybe the last 6 months or so. So it's been a fairly new endeavor for us. We recently opened up a studio there, and so a lot of what we've been trying to do is hire entry-level workers predominantly, because that's a lot of our workforce, and then kind of leaders to be managing those folks that are doing testing for some of our clients, both in the language on the localization side as well as the functional side. So what we have been seeing is there have been things that were understood about the culture of Mexico, which is predominantly where we're hiring for. And then we also do some hiring in Costa Rica too. But trying to understand what it was that the labor market, what shape it took in Mexico. I think there were some assumptions that were made up front, and we kind of had to pressure test some of those assumptions as we were starting to hire in that space. For the most part, we haven't had any issues, hiring necessarily on the entry level space, because there's a lot of attention and interest and energy around coming to work in the video game business. So that tends to trade really high for us. But then as we start to get up into higher levels of specialization, getting into leadership spaces, we had to change things up a little bit in order to find, the right sorts of candidates. And it also had to invite in us a little bit of flexibility with our desired and required qualifications. And then also as a result of that, cascading effects in the talent space is thinking through a much more robust and thoughtful onboarding experience to help kind of get people that were approximately 75 to 80% of the way there, and then bridging that gap with a robust onboarding approach, which I don't think we've necessarily talked about too much in this call today here, but I found to be tremendously impactful as we're going into a market that certainly Mexico isn't an emerging market in the global sense necessarily, right? It's been hopping for a while, but in the video game sense, it's pretty early. So because of that, we've planted the flag early, and as a result, we've had to think hard about how are we bringing in high quality, high potential talent and focusing on that, and then growing them from there. So that's been a lot of the journey. And beyond that, as Iska was saying quite extensively about the culture piece, there's a lot to be said there about trying to understand the culture, what motivates, and how do we take let's just say the United States mindset and try and translate that into a value proposition for the Mexican labor market. It's been an interesting journey.
No, very, very interesting. And actually, I remember a conversation that Irina and I had. Irina, of course, come from Eastern Europe back in the day. Irina, I hope you don't mind me saying, she's a veteran of the industry, of course, and she's experienced a different economic environment. And it was very interesting when people looked at what the demands were. And unsurprisingly, if you're coming from a developing country or an economy that isn't sort of particularly materially well off, then of course salary and compensation is going to be the number one factor in most of the cases.
Yes.
And only where in countries where you almost guaranteed an amazing salary, do other things start becoming more relevant for you, and you start saying, yeah, we care about this thing, or we care about values here, we care about this, that, and the other. But actually, you go the more poor you get in different countries, the less those things are important, because ultimately it's about translating their effort into material return to help them and their families, and that's something we shouldn't forget.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that we've noticed very much so, I think nearshore was something that was talked in the chat here a little bit. The idea of being able to, Hung, as you were saying about the time zones being a big benefit when it comes to Mexico or a lot of Latin America for United States-based companies, is that in emerging markets, because I've hired globally for many years, is that at the entry level, the compensation is less well understood for people that are just getting into the workforce. And then as you get up into higher levels of specialization, those people tend to better understand their value in the marketplace on a global scale. And as a result, where in companies where it's not necessarily as much of an emerging market, the compensation tends to be more of a linear increase that we're used to in most markets. But in those kinds of markets, it's kind of this geometric curve, or even an exponential or geometric curve, where the people that are paid at an entry level tend to be here, and there's this sharp increase because if you really have that specialization, then you've probably worked for global companies before, so you better understand what your value is, on the global market, and they tend to be far more competitive. And so it's been an interesting experience that Mexico has very much followed that tack. That where we perceive that there should be this sort of linear curve of a tester to a senior tester to a test lead and so forth. It's been more like this, where it's this really serious steep curve. It's been very interesting as an experience for sure.
That's fantastic. I love the visualization there, Steve, and I get it as well. Like, as you're a young person coming in, like everyone's ignorant of their market value, but that ignorance is shrinking with the connections we have these days and the availability of information. We're going to see salary transparency starting to emerge, so we're becoming even more aware as to what market value is. So the idea we can get away with just hiring someone permanently at a cheaper rate, that's receding as we're starting to see, okay, maybe you get them at the very early part of their career, first job, second job, by third job, they're going to be like as competitive as anyone else.
Well, and that's where that onboarding comes in, right? Is that you have to have a plan to like bridge some kind of skill gap by taking chances on people that aren't necessarily there, but maybe they have the hunger or the passion, which is a lot harder to detect in a straight recruiting process, right? Especially if you use technology in order to assess skills, or you're mostly just looking for keywords and resumes, you're going to miss that passion where you say, yeah, you know what? They don't totally know how to do this job, but we've got a fairly robust training and onboarding approach. So we could bridge that gap. So we might be able to pay a little bit less for somebody and get and maximize value out of them by actually, spending a little bit of money and time to do some upskilling or new skilling, get them there, and then boom, they're right there, right? So I would say that in order to keep being competitive in this space, following us, like what we're trying to do, is you really have to come up with that good onboarding approach so that you can start getting creative with who you're hiring. Or else, if you're just trying to straight hire your way out of workforce problems, the well's going to dry up eventually, especially in Latin America.
Yeah, very good. Talk to us a little bit about remote and remote assessment, Steve. How did you handle that? I mean, in terms of Latin Mexican candidates, let's say particularly Mexico, because I think that's where the predominant experience is.
Yeah.
Did the local labor market there like embrace being assessed remotely, or did they want to kind of have the in-person experience, or did you not discern any trend that was noticeable there?
We didn't even really do the in-person thing. We started with remote. The one recruiter that we had originally that was hiring for Mexico is based in Boston. Actually, we didn't actually bring in a recruiter that's local to Mexico until very recently. And we've used technology thus far in order to pre-vet all of our candidates. The expectation is that they had to, have an English proficiency, so being able to engage with the recruiter shouldn't have been a challenge. So it hasn't really been that much of an issue, frankly. I mean, our pipeline, has been fairly strong, especially for our entry level roles. People have been open to the idea of presenting themselves because we're using asynchronous interviewing in order to kind of pre-vet candidates before we engage with them on the recruiter side and the hiring manager side. Really hasn't been that much of an issue, frankly. I would say that sourcing, has been interesting for, some of the higher level roles, kind of like as we've talked about previously. But I don't think anybody's necessarily balked at the idea of not having an in-person interviewing experience, mostly because, again, we try and have a fairly robust onboarding experience that by the time that, the offer letter or contract is signed, that we have people in place that are helping them to get to day one. And then once they get to day one, there's trainers and onboarders that are picking it up from there. So we're trying to be flexible around that because our workers in Mexico have to be on site due to IP, reasons. So yeah, remote hiring, but for on-site roles, yeah, it hasn't been too much of a challenge.
Great stuff. Steve, this is you're only 6 months into the Mexico experience. How long do you think you're going to continue with this? Have you learned enough lessons to say, right, we're committing to this because it really works? Or are there any other are there any other locations or territories within Latin America that you're looking at and saying, you know what, maybe this is another underexplored area for us in Lionbridge?
I think it depends. I think that we have invested in the idea that Mexico is going to be a large player for us in North America. So right now we've got Mexico City going, and then we also have Boise, Idaho. That's one of our major hubs, and then we also have another great studio in Montreal. So we've kind of hit every single major country, that's around the United States, right? So the idea that we would go further than that and migrate, even more south, perhaps continuing to build up Costa Rica even further than we have been, are question marks for us, right? I think that our hope and our goal is to see as much as we possibly can about what Mexico labor market can offer us. And I think that it's going to be a mainstay for us going forward, and that's our hope and goal. But if we start to see that there's, translatable value in other countries, certainly between Mexico and Costa Rica, right, that we can kind of bridge some gaps, there's no reason we wouldn't. Lionbridge, generally speaking, so not Lionbridge Games, but the broader of Lionbridge also has an outfit in Sao Paulo. So, we already have a foothold in Brazil to a certain extent. So the idea of being able to expand there isn't ever necessarily off the books. It's just, I think Mexico right now is yielding great results for us, and we'll keep pursuing until the very end,
Especially for those Portuguese speakers, right? I know that, Steve, you had a challenge that I think you solved eventually to find Portuguese-speaking employees in Mexico.
Yes, yeah. So one of the major service delivery offerings that Lionbridge provides, right, is localization and globalization and translation, right, for video games. And one of the pieces of that is being able to do QA on the localization that we provide as a service, right? So one of the goals that we certainly have in the Mexican market is to understand, it being a megalopolis as it is, what is the diversity of workers that exist in Mexico City that could work on site, that have, native level proficiency of languages that are in Latin America, so that we could utilize Mexico as a base of operations. It's an open question. We're still trying to sort it out. Like I said, it's only been 6 months, but we are seeing, a fairly diverse pipeline that's coming our way. So we have hope, but you never know. If we saw a sudden rush and then it's going to taper off, or it's quiet and it's only going to get bigger, you really don't know sometimes, right? I think technology and benchmarking exists to help give some hints, but you never know.
The final question for you, if you could teleport back in time 6 months and give yourself some advice that you now know, having gone through this 6 month period, what's one bit of advice that would have saved that other Steve a bit of time and a bit of pain?
I would have looked for leaders first. Frankly, I would have looked for higher specialization workers and leaders first, and focused as we were opening up the studio. And then I think we probably would have pursued our entry level workers after we had secured more leaders, that we had sort of prepared and set the culture before we had started to proceed in bringing the greater workforce forward. But lesson learned, hindsight 2020, etc. We've managed to sort it out. But if I had gotten to go back in time, I think I probably would have done that first.
That's it, the mythical time machine. Steve, it's been wonderful getting your input on this. It's always interesting speaking to individuals who are in the front line and actually doing the work. So great that you could join us for this conversation. Hopefully we'll get a chance to speak again, man.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Steve.
Great. What an interesting experience, interesting guy. We have to come to an end to the show, by the way, folks, because we're over a time. As a thank you, everyone, for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed this series. I do want to, for 2024, I do want to do the How to Hire series every week. I want to hit 52 countries because I think there's lots of interesting things and nuances, and every different country is different. I'm going to try and do this. It's probably going to end up being a midweek show because I don't want it being a dominant thing on the Fridays because we've got other things to talk about. But I'm thinking maybe we do a Wednesday show where we do a how to hire in country X. What are your thoughts on that, folks? Would that be interesting? Let me know in the comments. Okay, Jonathan, listen, I gotta let you go. Thanks for jumping in, being awesome sort of co-host. We'll definitely like to see you again. We need to catch up as well. We need to do the MENA sort of show also. Let's not forget about that. So we still have that on cooking. So we'll do that as soon as we can. But yeah, great to see you, man. And where are you, by the way? You're in Spain these days, aren't you?
I am. I'm in Marbella.
Marbella, amazing. Okay, great. Well, listen, we'll catch up soon, and we'll take it on from there. Okay.
Thank you.
Great. That's it, folks. Hope you've enjoyed it. We'll speak to you next time. No Brainfood Live this Friday. We're actually going to be, I think, next Thursday. Next Thursday is going to be State of the Recruiter Job Market, I think. So follow the channel if you like this conversation. And we'll see you very shortly. Have a good weekend, everyone.